So the first category is the process itself. Now, if you change the way the DNA functions, you change the RNA, and we found out 2 months ago by eating certain RNA it can completely mess up your gene expression, so that's not a safe thing. It can change proteins, and proteins can influence all sorts of metabolic processes, and it can create changes in the natural compounds. I mean, people talk about blueberries being healthy for this and different foods. Those are the natural compounds. There's thousands of them. One plant has 5,000, up to 5,000. So we have no idea even what they do. And yet when you make these changes at the DNA level, you can change a whole series of things and have no concept, no clue whether you've just taken out an anti-cancer drug or promoted a cancer-promoting piece. And they don't test for it. They don't test for it before the crops go on the market. So this test here, which is full of complicated words, you don't have to read it, is a look at all the different proteins in Monsanto's BT corn variety compared to its identical non-GMO genetics. So you have the Mon 810 corn, which is Monsanto's BT variety, and you have the one that it started out as. 43 different proteins dramatically changed their levels of expression. Some proteins had different shapes, which shows dramatic changes in the cell, which can turn a harmless protein into a deadly one. One protein was switched on. It doesn't express itself in regular corn, and it's an allergen. It's a known allergen. So if you eat Monsanto's BT corn, you may get an allergic reaction, which you won't get from normal corn. And Monsanto's soy has as much as 7 times the amount of trypsin inhibitor, a known allergen. This is Monsanto's own study. They hid this information. It was recovered and leaked and made available. A doubling of an anti-nutrient that blocks the absorption of nutrients. All these different changes. In fact, soy and corn both have higher levels of lignin, and lignin, the metabolic pathway that produces lignin, produces rotenone, and rotenone is linked to Parkinson's. So eating GM soy and corn might increase your risk of Parkinson's, but no one knows if it's true. Now, when people think about the risks of GMOs, they usually think of only one category. You're putting in a gene, the gene produces a protein, is the protein safe? Let's talk about the 2 categories of GMOs. There's 2 basic categories, the poison drinkers and the poison producers. We talked about the poison producers. Those are the BT corn crops and the BT cotton crops. They produce a poisonous insecticide. Now there's another class which is 80–85% of all GM crops, and that's the herbicide-tolerant poison drinkers. Monsanto scientists found bacteria surviving in a chemical waste dump near their factory, not being killed by Roundup herbicide, which normally kills bacteria. So they figured, great, let's put this in the food supply. Turns out, they say it's completely safe, history of safe use, only affects certain types of insects, is destroyed in the digestive system of mammals and humans. They don't test BT crops for safety, they assume it away with these 3 assumptions. They're all 3 wrong. They're all 3 completely ignoring peer-reviewed published studies. Hundreds of people who were sprayed with BT had allergic and flu-like symptoms. And you know where those people were sprayed? In Washington State and Vancouver for gypsy moth infestation. And they complained of allergic and flu-like symptoms. Some had to go to the hospital. They fed BT, natural BT, to mice. It wasn't destroyed during digestion. It caused damage to their intestinal tract and an immune response. Now, the Bt that's in the crops is not the same Bt that's in the spray form. Some is dramatically different, molecularly as much as 40% different. So they should never say, well, we'll just assume that the Bt in the crops is safe because the Bt spray is safe. It's very different. It's thousands of times more concentrated. It's designed to be more toxic. It has properties of a known allergen. The spray washes off. The Bt in the crops does not. Now, they fed Bt corn to mice, and the mice developed an immune response. They fed Bt corn that also was Roundup Ready to mice. These are government studies. And they had fewer babies and smaller babies. Monsanto claimed that there was no effect on its rats fed for 90 days. But when the raw data was obtained through lawsuits and leaking and reviewed by independent scientists with proper statistics, they found signs of toxicity and immune system responses and indicators for serious disorders in Monsanto's rats. I talked to a former scientist from Monsanto, and he said he knew that when they fed probably rats genetically modified crops and found such significant problems in the rats, instead of withdrawing the crops, they rewrote the study to make it look less problematic. In India, thousands of farm workers who are picking the Bt cotton are getting the same allergic and flu-like symptoms as those in Washington. They're getting rashes all over their body in particular. Here's the symptoms experienced by those in Washington who were sprayed with Bt and those in India. They allow their animals to graze on cotton plants after harvest, and they have for years without incident until Bt cotton was introduced. Thousands of sheep died. One small study found 100% mortality rate among the sheep eating the GM cotton plants. No symptoms for those that ate the non-GM. Buffalo in the state of Haryana experiencing reproductive problems, milk production problems, skin problems, and death with cottonseed. I visited a village in Andhra Pradesh. They allowed their buffalo to graze on cotton plants after harvest for 8 years without a problem. 1 day of eating Bt cotton plants, 1 day killed all 13 of their buffalo. I asked them, how many of you personally felt itching from working in a Bt cotton field? And I took this picture and most raised their hand. They also mentioned that 26 sheep and goats had died from eating Bt cotton. Now, all that collateral damage that affects the health properties of GMOs can also affect how it grows and interacts with the environment. There's more variables in the environment. And the Bt cotton didn't do too well when it was first planted in the US. Monsanto had to pay out tens of millions of dollars because some of it just ended up not producing cotton, falling over. In India, they buy up seed companies. Monsanto's the biggest seed company in the world. And they bought up the cotton seed companies in India, many of them, not all of them. And the cotton doesn't always perform reliably. But Monsanto has convinced millions of farmers to invest more money in the more expensive seeds and the associated chemicals. Many of them actually borrow money on the secondary market, like loan sharks, and they're unable to even repay the debt. And many commit suicide. The number of suicides is staggering. In 2008, the UK Daily Mail estimated 125,000. Vandana Shiva now estimates 250,000. So it's a kind of a genocide. We have death in a farm of cows in Germany eating Bt corn. A couple of dozen farmers in the Midwest say their animals got sterile. People in the Philippines say that a certain variety, when it was pollinating, caused all sorts of problems. And when the same seeds were planted in 4 more villages, the same symptoms returned. They also complained of deaths among animals and some unexplained human deaths. Now, the third reason that things can go wrong is that when you take a gene from one species and put it into a different species, the gene may function differently. The protein may function differently, may be shaped differently. There's a lot of variables that they don't take into consideration. For example, when Monsanto's BT corn that produces the most popular BT corn, when the gene was put into that gene through the gene gun, 30% of it was lopped off. They only had 70% of the transgene made it. So the amino acids that it created, that are then folded up into a protein, they weren't the ones that they wanted. It was different. It's a little technical, and I don't want to go so technical today. It was different. The amino acid sequences can be different than what they expect. It's amino acid sequences that get folded up into proteins, and they're often different. Now, even if they're the same, they could be folded up differently or have different molecular attachments, which can be very dangerous. Like peas made in Australia, designed to be exported to India to sell as food, genetically modified to produce an insecticide, passed all of the studies that all of the other GM crops had gone through, and these passed with flying colors and were about to be introduced and make the developers a lot of money. But for some reason, they decided, let's do one more test. So they exposed mice to the protein that they had put into the peas. They got the protein from kidney beans. So they took the natural kidney bean protein, exposed it to mice. The mice were fine, fabulous. It's a safe protein. Then they took the protein out of the pea. Now this was the same amino acid sequence, so it was an identical protein. And they exposed it to mice, and the mice had 5 inflammatory reactions. Serious immune system activation, suggesting that this harmless protein had somehow become potentially deadly. And if it had been served to humans, it might cause deadly anaphylactic shock, which if it were sent to India, there's no way in the world they would have been able to trace it to the peas that they had imported from Australia. They looked inside the structure of the protein and found, oh, the sugar chain molecules that attach themselves to the protein, they have a slightly different shape. Oh, this must explain it. And what a surprise, they thought, that there was such a dramatic change by moving the genes from such closely related species between beans and peas. When a European reporter asked Monsanto's European spokesperson to comment on the demise of the Australian peas, he said, "This proves that the regulatory system works." It actually demonstrates how Monsanto spins the truth. You see, none of their products had ever been tested on the mice this way. No other GM food crop developer had tested their products on mice in this way. They had only passed the stuff that the peas had already passed. And Monsanto doesn't move genes between similar species. They move genes between kingdoms, from bacteria and viruses to plants. And they just assume that it functions the same. The fourth possible problem is that there's more herbicide residues. Here's an herbicide-tolerant corn, where they fed it to chickens and twice the number of chickens died, but this industry study was done so poorly that even a doubling of the death rate was not statistically significant. Now, the amount of herbicide use is killer. It's just increasing dramatically. How many people have heard of superweeds? Superweeds, not like Superman. These are not the good guys, although ultimately they may be doing some good by helping us kick out GMOs. These are weeds that no longer die when sprayed with Roundup. And they're in 11 to 14 million acres in the United States. And it's devastating farmers, because why do farmers use Roundup Ready crops? To weed. And now it's not working. And what are they doing? They're using more Roundup. or they're using more toxic chemicals like 2,4-D, part of Agent Orange. So it's 383 million pounds more herbicide use in the United States in the first 13 years, and that's the amount of is just accelerating, 30% increase in the last year of the study. Now Roundup, how many people have heard that Roundup is safe? Has anyone heard that Roundup is safe? It's another one of those lies. Yeah, Monsanto said it. Yeah, they said it's biodegradable. Well, they were convicted of false advertising in the New York court, but that didn't stop them from still labeling it biodegradable in Europe. And then years later, they were convicted by the Supreme Court in France for the same lie. Now, Roundup, the active ingredient is called glyphosate. And it was originally patented in 1964 as a chelator. How many people have heard the word chelation? Chelation is normally associated with getting rid of heavy metals. You take something that chelates, it hugs the heavy metal, and then it goes out with the heavy metal goes out of the system with it. So it basically is a big hugger. It binds with these things. Now, the chelation of Roundup, it hugs all these different nutrients and makes them unavailable to the plants, making the plant weak, defenseless against disease. Then Roundup promotes diseases in the soil-borne pathogens, which kill the plants. So it creates a perfect storm. Weaker plants, stronger disease, kills the plant. It also destroys some beneficial bacteria in the soil. And it sticks around in the soil for months or years. There's a dramatic reduction in the uptake of these nutrients, and then to the right, an even more dramatic reduction of the movement of these nutrients around the plant. So the plants are starved. The plants are nutrient deficient. Now, what do the livestock eat in the United States? Roundup-ready crops. Soy, corn, cotton meal, canola meal, sugar beet pulp, alfalfa. All Roundup ready. So the animals now are experiencing a universal depletion of certain nutrients. These minerals are really key for certain metabolic processes that keep the animals safe. And without these nutrients, there's a lot of diseases that can happen. So we are eating nutrient deficient, sick livestock. They are eating nutrient deficient food. We are eating nutrient deficient food. And when you spray Roundup, it goes into the plant, and then part of it gets accumulated in the food portion of the plant. So we're eating Roundup in high quantities. And Roundup is linked to birth defects, cancer, endocrine disruption, placental cell death, etc., etc., etc. Lower sperm count, abnormal sperm. Roundup promotes diseases in the soil, some of which had been under proper management, but are now going crazy. There's over 40 plant diseases on the rise because of the use of Roundup. It accumulates in the soil for months or years. The alfalfa, which was just approved, has dramatic reduction in certain nutrients. And that's going to cause a serious problem in our dairy cows. Some scientists discovered a new type of organism, as small as a virus, resembling a fungus, in high concentrations in crops sprayed with Roundup. In high concentrations in certain plants with diseases that are associated with Roundup. And in high concentrations in the tissues of aborted fetuses. They took this new organism in a laboratory, exposed it to a chicken who was pregnant, killed the embryo within 24 hours. So this organism may be responsible for what's currently being seen as a tremendous outbreak of livestock infertility and spontaneous abortions. and for certain plant diseases which are happening in great numbers. Maybe it's related to human infertility. We don't know. This was not supposed to be made public. It was described in a letter from Dr. Don Huber to the Secretary of Agriculture, written on January 17th. It was leaked onto the internet somehow, and that's why I'm telling you about it. But research is ongoing to see if this in fact is a problem and what to do about it. The fifth potential problem is that genes might transfer from the GM food into our bacteria living inside our intestines, possibly into our own DNA. Now, the FDA scientists were very concerned about gene transfer. They were concerned about what's called an antibiotic-resistant marker gene. It's used in the transformation process when you make a new GM crop. It's only used for that particular process, but it remains in every cell of all the crops grown in 160 million acres, or anyone that actually uses it. Not everyone uses it, but most crops use this antibiotic-resistant marker gene. And they were concerned that this antibiotic-resistant marker gene might transfer to bacteria, turning disease-causing bacteria into bacteria that could not be killed with antibiotics. And they were told, don't worry, genes are destroyed during digestion. We've heard that before, didn't we? With the BT. Well, the genes, it turns out they decided to do a study. It's a brilliant study. They took 7 human volunteers. They had colostomy bags. They had their lower intestines removed, not for the study. And they fed them a GM soy burger and a soy milkshake, looked in the bag and found, oh, what a surprise. How much intact genetically modified genes had survived passage through the stomach and small intestines. But in 3 of the 7 volunteers, before they were fed the meal, inside the DNA of the bacteria living inside their intestines was the gene that had been found by Monsanto scientists in a chemical waste dump near their factory. The Roundup Ready gene had transferred along with the on switch, the promoter, into the DNA of the bacteria inside their intestines and was there on a stable basis. And maybe it was just a coincidence, but they couldn't kill the bacteria with Roundup. They had Roundup Ready gut bacteria, suggesting that long after we stop eating GMOs, we may have these foreign proteins produced continuously inside of us. What if the BT gene transfers from corn chips? We don't know if it does because this was a UK government-funded study. As soon as they found out genes transferred, they stopped the funding. So we don't know if we're turning our intestinal flora into living pesticide factories. And this is what the doctors who I had spoken to last week were particularly concerned about. Because they're describing symptoms which they believe are related to permeability of the gut wall. When you have fully digested food going into the bloodstream, that can cause immune system reactions, and autoimmune disease, etc. Some people blame that for autism. There was a study done this year in Canada. They tested the blood of women, pregnant women, and fetuses. And in 93% of the pregnant women, they found BT toxin in the blood. And 20% of their fetuses, and 2/3 of the non-pregnant women. They claim, well, they guessed that the BT toxin was not there from the corn. It was corn BT toxin, but that it was not, they couldn't have been eating corn all the time to get this BT toxin in such high percentages, because people don't eat corn all the time, and it wasn't going to hang out in the blood permanently. They figured it must come from the meat or milk from animals fed the BT corn. But that's a big question mark, whether the protein is going to survive that whole system and end up in an intact form to be recognizable in our blood. What if BT toxin genes transfer to gut bacteria and produce continuously inside of us the BT toxin? that might be a better explanation for why 93% of pregnant women have Bt toxin in their blood, which might also be an explanation for why this current generation of children is undergoing unprecedented harm. It's a huge question, and there's not enough data to conclude. But the American Academy of Environmental Medicine says we don't need to wait for more data. There is enough data in the animal feeding studies showing reproductive problems, immune system problems, accelerated aging, organ damage, gastrointestinal problems, dysfunctional regulation of insulin and cholesterol. They say all doctors in America should prescribe non-GMO diets to every patient. Let's take a look at evidence from soy and see if soy is a problem. Soon after GM soy was introduced to the UK, soy allergies skyrocketed by 50%. No follow-up study that was done to see if GMOs were the cause, but there are many reasons why it might be. They fed GM soy to mice. They had dramatically reduced pancreatic digestive enzymes. If we don't digest proteins quickly, then it gives them more time to produce an allergic reaction. We may cause allergic reactions to a wide variety of foods by eating GM soy. One study showed in the GM soy an allergen that was not in the non-GM soy. One study showed a 7-fold increase in trypsin inhibitor, a known allergen. There's more herbicide residues in the soy, which could cause reactions. Even the Roundup Ready protein, that one which is produced continuously inside of us, that has properties of a dust mite allergen. Here's a picture of the rats' livers on the right from those that were fed GM soy. You can see it's gnarly. That's a technical term, gnarly. Testicles change from pink to blue in rats fed GM soy.